Welcome to the Elevate Your Equity podcast, where we, as married busy professionals, leverage real estate investing to unlock the 3+1 degrees of freedom: health, location, time, and financial.
And today we've got a special guest on the show. His name is George Roberts. George is a founder of Walnut Grove Homes, an upscale residential construction company based in Troy, Michigan, which reached seven-figure status in 2021. He's also principal at Horizon Multifamily, which sponsors value-add multifamily opportunities in the Southeast for qualified passive investors. He's a general partner on a 34-unit apartment near Knoxville, Tennessee. Nice market, by the way. He owns a 14-unit apartment in Orlando, Florida as a joint venture as well. In addition to his active multifamily investments, he's passively invested in 468 multifamily units. Before devoting himself to commercial real estate in full time, he worked as an award-winning data scientist and also as a bioscientist with over 700 citations in the field of genomics, microbiology, and physiology. And one thing I have to also add here to this bio, George, is that you're also the host of the Foundry podcast, where he talks with CEOs and entrepreneurs about their businesses, best practices, and ways to move forward. So, George, it is an honor to have you on the show. How are you today?
Excellent, Derek. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Now, today, we didn't mention this in the bio, but today we're going to be talking about something that is super important for entrepreneurs and investors and business people in general, which is networking. And you're a scientist and you love to build networks. So we're just going to call you a network scientist. How does that sound?
Perfect. Yes, I was in network science for a little while.
Very cool. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started then. So what I wanted to do first is understand a little bit about where you came from, before, like as you were working your full-time job. Tell us a little bit about how you got excited about real estate investing while working a full-time job.
Yeah, a long time coming. It was during the depths of the Great Recession. I had my primary residence. It was a good time to move up because it was 2010. We were 1 year away from the very depths of real estate prices. Although we didn't know it at that time, we just knew prices were really good. And so my dad suggested to me that I should just keep the primary residence, but turn it into a rental. And I think a lot of people probably got into being a landlord like that. It's one form of being an accidental landlord. So I don't know necessarily that I would have tried it other than that, and did that for about 7 years. And over that time, the house appreciated just as expected. So rather than taking a 50% haircut, we got out of it essentially at par. And in the meantime, enjoyed some really awesome cash flow. And when we finally did sell that, I felt really sad. I missed that cash flow, and I was already, very much into the rich dad, poor dad set. And I understood that cash flow is really your true wealth. And I was still surprised at just what a great investment it was. I mean, there's everything about it, right? You get the cash flow, you get the tax benefits. And so I kind of wanted to get back into it. But I decided I wanted to do it the right way this time. I wanted to do it at scale. So that's a sort of a data science term. So let's fast forward a few years. So now I'm working in data science, and I've been enjoying that cash flow for a little while. It's gone away, and I decide that I want to get back into it. So we're all about doing things in parallel, right? If you can do, parallelize your calculations, you can do like thousands, millions, billions of things at the same time. So we like to say we handle data at scale. Well, I think of multifamily as doing real estate at scale. So I realized that it wasn't going to be easy if I buy 1, 2, 3, 5 single family homes. That's not really the way to go. So just jump right into it, get some apartments, and then I can enjoy all that cash flow while at the same time not having to deal with dozens of transactions.
I think that's awesome. Thank you for going into that very much. So when you were doing this at the same time, can you talk to us a little bit about how you were able to do that as a full-time individual? Because I know, you have wife at home, you've got your full-time job, and now you're trying to add on this extra layer. So let's explore that just a little bit before we jump into the meat of what we want to talk about here. How were you able to balance all that?
So I've always been a pretty busy person. Coming from bioscience, sometimes you have to watch your experiments all night. So anything that I did in the corporate world was not nearly half as challenging. But even so, obviously, I was working all the time. I worked on weekends, evenings. It was kind of
Wow.
like going back into bioscience again in that respect. Some of it, I think, is time management, but also, I had been at the same job for many years. And I think that really helps in terms of efficiency. I made a conscious decision not to try and switch jobs. There's plenty of reasons over a long tenure to maybe perhaps want to do that, but I know what sort of upheaval that brings into your life. So I think one of the keys was definitely just staying in the same place.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so you say that staying in your current job, but adding on this extra layer on the side with the bits and pieces and the time that you had, right, was probably the best way that you would recommend others to do it as well.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and move into the meat of the show. I want to start talking about networking because, when we first got connected, I can't remember exactly how we got connected in the first place, but again, that's a testament to the power of networks, right? So let's go ahead and jump into this. So before we get into some tactical advice, I want to ask you personally, how has networking affected you positively in your personal and in your professional life? I'd love to hear more about that, like some context behind your superpower.
Right. So I love your question because it certainly has impacted my personal life. And I think it's certainly a very healthy skill to develop. I spent most of my life learning more math, learning more logic, programming, all those sorts of things. And those are wonderful things and led to a very exciting and very busy life. But whatever you do, like take Dale Carnegie, for example, he'll tell you in How to Win Friends and Influence People that 80% of what you earn is not your technical skills, it's how you deal with people. And of course, that's because if you're really good at that, you can become a business leader, you can become an entrepreneur. There's a lot of things you can do that will take you far out of the pay scale of simply being a technical genius. So how has it impacted me? I would say, obviously, it's a lot more healthy to get out, especially in this age of COVID, right? A lot of people, we now have the option, here we're speaking through the internet, and that's a wonderful thing, but we have the option to do so much through the internet and sitting in our bedroom or our office. And I just don't think that's very healthy. And I think it's much better to get out there. So how has it impacted me professionally? Well, in a huge way. I don't think there's anything other than real estate where networking makes such a big difference. I mean, you have such complex transactions, even the residential space. In the commercial space, 10x it. The transactions are more complicated. You have more moving parts. It's not something where you can simply rely on your real estate agent to make sure that all the paperwork is filed correctly. You've really got to go out there and meet a lot of people if you're going to do it right.
I love that. Thank you. So, okay, great. I want to talk to you about networking again. And why is it so important to you? And where did this importance come from? How did you get inspired? I know that COVID was a piece of it, but
right.
How did you make the understanding or make the connection that you're like, oh my gosh, like I need to be networking with people? And then I get the feeling that as you were doing this, like you started to really love it and start to build it into your strategy of building up your network.
Yeah. So let's go back to the formation of Horizon Multifamily. So they know I'm a bioscientist, data scientist, technical guy. I actually like spreadsheets. I'm one of those mutants who doesn't mind numbers. And they brought me in thinking, well, maybe this guy will do the underwriting. And I didn't mind that at all. That's kind of fun. And there's a lot to it. I mean, everything from just making sure everything gets entered correctly to it's really the creativity behind it, right? It's telling a story with numbers. And people look at numbers like, oh, it's all technical, but it really isn't. It's when you're able to tell that story behind the story. That's when you understand and the numbers. So I did that for a little while, but then I realized, hey, if we're going to take down these big deals, somebody has to go out and raise the capital. And I looked at my partners and none of them really seemed inclined towards that. We all had some amazing superpowers to speak of. Like, for example, one of my partners, he has over 30 years of construction experience. Another one had over $35 million of commercial real estate assets under management. And we all brought something really amazing to the table, deal finders, et cetera. But there was really nobody who was going to go out there and raise the capital. So I thought, well, I've got to go out, start the podcast, start networking and figure out. And when I did this, I had about 1,300 contacts on LinkedIn, which may sound like a lot, but most of those, that was from my bioscience days, from data science. These were technical people who may or may not be interested in following me into this. And as I've gotten a little further in, some of them have, but then I had to go out and add another 1,000 of people who really understand commercial real estate and who were willing to sort of come along and take the next steps.
Yeah, I want to underscore something here. And I love, first of all, that when you are doing the underwriting, a lot of people think it's just very numbers based, but it is very much a business plan, a story, a strategy. There's so much to it. And so I love that you mentioned that maybe some people that are perceived as being underwriters or being good with numbers are maybe like looked at differently, or looked at incorrectly, because those people are the ones that are putting together the narrative of what it is that you actually want to do, what the assumptions are, and that. So I just wanted to applaud you there for that as well. And then what I thought—
Can I add something there on the technical angle? Is that one of the things I've noticed is that people who are actually good at math, in other words, they write theorems and proofs, they don't like that sort of stuff at all. So I think there's sort of this sweet spot in between where you are that sort of a storyteller and you are adept enough with numbers that you can step into that role.
I think so. I think that's beautiful. Would you call that like maybe a left-right brain type of combination type of person, right? Something like that? I
would, but again, I came from data science, and that's exactly what it's all about. It's all about telling a story through numbers.
Okay, love it. Excellent. The other thing I wanted to mention in the last question that I asked you was that you started off doing this because there was a need in your business. Your partners weren't willing to do it. And so I think that just want to point out that points to the caliber of person that you are, even if it maybe seemed uncomfortable at the time, but you got your podcast together. And then one other thing too, is that you said that you had 1,300 connections. Yeah. That is, I remember back in my full-time days, right, when I was working over there, and obviously I have way more connections now, but if you're going to put a number to it, when you have 1,300 connections and you're working as a full-time data scientist or someone who works within the biology or in the sciences or in a very data rich type of environment, you take the average of the people that are working in that environment and how many connections they have, and you are I would say maybe 20 or 30 or 40 fold over the people that they even take the time to connect with online. So maybe that was a hint or an indication, George, that you had some sort of knack for networking, even when you were in the full-time space.
Absolutely. And when I was in bioscience, it's very, very hard to find positions. And so that's one of the things that drove me to network. But even before then, there was a time in my life when I was really shy, and then I started playing in bands. And so, I think any successful person knows this. If you have a strong enough desire, you will become determined enough that you will do whatever it takes. And so I had that example in my life of going from very shy to actually getting on stage in front of people. And after doing that, it's hard to look back.
Okay, love this. All right, let's get into the meat of this thing.
All right.
My first question for you is, for networking, nature versus nurture. Do you believe that people are born with these networking skills? Do you think it's a developed talent? I'd like to hear your thought on this.
A little bit of both, but my wife and I were both rather shy at one point in our life. And if you met my wife, you'd find that she's even more social than me. And I have become very social. So I think that there's a lot of nurture in anything. And again, it's all about determination. Look at somebody like Winston Churchill. He had difficulty putting 3 words together early in his life. To become a great orator, he had to memorize his speeches. So truly, I believe that when people become determined, they can literally overcome any amount of natural obstacle.
Love that. Thank you so much. For those of us who are not currently inclined to networking automatically, what can you tell us about building those skills up?
Well, like anything, repetition is the mother of skill. But one of the things that occurred to me as I was walking up to my office today is that when I go to in-person networking, you'd be surprised how many people don't bring one of these along. And just to have, in case you're listening to the audio version, I'm holding up my business card. And so on the front, I've got my nice pearl coat with my information. On the back, I've actually got my podcast. And I tell people, hey, you can just scan the back of this and find the podcast. So first of all, have a card, any card, even if it says, John Smith, real estate investor, because at least people will be able to remember your name and they can get in touch with you. And the second thing is, since you're going to take some time to get these cards made, you might as well make them nice. And I find that taking a little time to even if you have to pay somebody $50 to put together some sort of a design, well worth it. Because if you not only show up with a card, but with one that stands out, then you're 2 steps ahead.
Although what I was looking for with this is if we back up a little bit, right? Let's talk about people who are maybe, they understand that networking is important, right? And at least if the people that are listening to the show understand how important it is to build a network, because we talk about it a lot. But if there's someone who's not inclined to doing that, like what did you use to motivate yourself to be connected or to start getting out there to get connected? Because, for a lot of people that are introverted, it's very hard for them to take the action on it, right? And so what did you do in those early days to help get you out there for this?
Right. So for me, there was no lack of inclination. I'm obviously at both ends of the spectrum. To do the technical things that I've done, I'm a huge introvert, but I also thrive on people. And so, like many people, I don't think that there's any addiction there. But if you're one of those people who feels challenged, you just have to look at the rewards. And obviously, if you're already in real estate and you're having the conversation, I'm not really sure if I want to become a better networker, then you're already having obviously some issues with the inclination. So you have to look a little further afield. Like what would my life look like if I wasn't afraid to get up, for example, in front of people and speak? So I've got my own in-person networking. And so every month I have to get up there, and usually it really is an impromptu speech with my schedule. I would love to spend an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours preparing for this, but that's just not going to happen. And so just think about what would your life look like if you could meet anybody in the room. If you go to the party and you're not the person who's just nursing their drink all evening, what would it look like if you went 3 steps beyond that and you actually become a public speaker? So you just, I think, really need to begin with the end in mind.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And what tools do you employ to find the best people to connect with? Like, let's say that, you are at an event, right? Or you're at this event where there's 1,000 people. Right before this recording, we were talking about the Best Ever conference, which is up here in Colorado, a couple weeks away from when we're recording this. And just out of curiosity, like how would you approach trying to find the right people to network with there? Or would you just kind of have like this expansive, massive approach and see who fits? I'm curious your thoughts on this.
Right. So I think that we have to take a step back. So I think a lot of your listeners are in commercial real estate. So think about, I'll use the example of multifamily real estate. Really, I think this works with any commercial real estate, but just figure out where you add value. Are you the deal finder? Are you the capital raiser? Are you the one who likes to do the underwriting? Can you be on site and do the due diligence? Do you have possibly a construction background where, being on site actually has some additional value? So just figure out who you are. When you know who you are, that makes things a whole lot easier, because if you're going to go out there and just say, well, hey, I want to be a multifamily investor, that's hard. It's really hard because people need something to latch onto. They need to know something that's unique about you, and they need to at least know what you like to do, even if you don't feel skilled at it yet. And so when I joined my group, I was very interested in it. I had a background in real estate, so I'd been a landlord for about a decade. At that point, I had even helped my sister launch a construction company. So I have a real estate background, but I wasn't an underwriter. And my friend Paul, he came to me, and at the time we hardly knew each other. We'd just gone to the same meetups a few times. He said, hey, my friends and I, we underwrite 2 deals a week. I'd like to show you how to underwrite. I'm like, well, sure, man, tell me what to do. So, but again, you have to at least state that interest. Like, yes, I'm interested in learning how to underwrite deals.
Beautiful. Well said. When you go to some of these networking events, or when you're doing your own, right, which you've created on your own, how do you prepare yourself for that? Or how would you recommend people prepare themselves for these events?
Great. Well, I would say if you already know who you are, it's going to be pretty simple. But when I go in there, you do need to have a little bit of a speech. So some people call it the elevator pitch. And so if people ask me like, hey, what are you looking to get out of tonight? I would say I'm looking for 2 things. I'm looking for business partners, people that can bring me deals, and I'm also looking for passive investors. And that helps to frame the conversation. So now that I'm full time, I plan to spend a lot of time doing market research, doing underwriting and finding deals. But more in the past, that was something that really didn't flow with the day job. So you're either out there with the podcast, learning how to raise the capital, or you're out there finding the deals. I find it very difficult to do both. But yeah, know who you are, know what sort of person you want to meet. And then when you meet people, a lot of people are connectors, right? They might say, oh yeah, you know what, I'm in single family, but you know what, Fred over here, Fred is in multifamily. Let me introduce you.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I think a lot of people think that they're not connectors, but I think everyone has a little bit of connectors in them, right? Because if you see someone that says something that triggers someone else in your head, just the way that commercial real estate is, or even single family residential, there's going to want to be this value add happening where you're just helping people out because that like it's just a very abundant field. That's why I love the field of real estate investing in general. And I think that everyone has a little bit of connector in them. So I would also add on to that, George, and maybe you can comment on this too, is that know when you go into these events that you do have something to provide, that you do have something that you can help people with, right? And so just come in with that positive attitude of just wanting to help other people, being listening, attentive, wanting to find out who that person is, and just a genuine curiosity. And so that's something that I was wondering if that is helpful for you as well.
Absolutely. And I think with anything, regardless of where you feel like you fit in to the spectrum of commercial real estate, you got to find that way to add value. And I feel like connecting people is possibly one of the easiest ways. Now, I think how we got connected was through Cody Lewis. Cody is always sending me somebody great to have on my podcast. And I'm always trying to send him somebody too. But half the time he says, oh yeah, I already interviewed that person. They're great. But connecting people, and it does take some effort, right? I mean, let me go back to Dale Carnegie. One of his techniques, like one of the things he'll tell you is that if you take an interest in people, you'll find that they're interesting. And if you value people, you'll find that they bring value into your life, right? And so if you're going to meet people, you got to remember names. And you got to remember at least one thing about that person, because if you can remember one thing about that person, you're already at least 2 steps ahead of everyone else who's stumbling to say, and what was your name again? Oh, Derek, right? Yeah. But if I remember Derek and you've got the Elevate Equity podcast and that you're an Airbnb nomad and all that, we just pick up where we left off and you're going to make friends like crazy. But yeah, connect people. And that's really the thing to do. But it does take some time because you have to remember, right? You have to remember, what does everybody do? And then when somebody comes along, boom, it's a very simple way to add value.
Yeah, absolutely. And you must have read my mind, or somehow you're peering through the screen to look at my show notes, because my next question was, do you have any advice for remembering people you've met with virtually or in person? And because I know that you talked about making sure you remember the name. That's something that I intuitively understood after my early days of networking. It's very embarrassing if you don't remember the person's name, and then you can't you can't quite remember what they're doing and you're trying to figure it out in the middle of the conversation. You're kind of stumbling through, and it's very easy for someone to pick up on that. So to prevent that from happening, what techniques or advice do you have to help people remember who you've met, either virtually or in person?
Right. All I have is the classic techniques. So the first is just repeat the name a few times during the conversation and use the name a couple of times in the conversation. Mm-hmm. Not overly much, Derek, but you see what I did there, right?
Yeah.
That helps me remember. And it's also a confirmation, because if the first time I use your name is 6 months later, I might be a little confused. Is it really Derek? But use it once or twice, and it's much more comfortable to be corrected after knowing somebody for 5 minutes as opposed to 5 months later. And then sometimes there are mnemonics, which I hope everybody understands. Yeah, the idea of just like a little memory trick. If they remind you of something, their name reminds you of something, or maybe the place you met them reminds you of something, then you can use that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. The other thing I wanted to add on to that as additional layer of bonus is that people, especially if you read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I think one of the tricks in there was to say their name when you're talking with them, because people love to hear their own name, right? Yes. Like their ears perk up, right? And at the same time, you're kind of syncing your eyes, your ears, and your mouth like all up at the same time when you say that person's name when you're in the conversation with them. So I think that's brilliant advice. So you think it's simple, but to me, this is gold. It
is gold. And I'll tell you, one of my favorite investors in the world is Charlie Munger. And one of his sayings is take a simple idea and take it seriously. Consider value investing. Now, and on the face of it, at least, it's a simple idea. But if you take it seriously, there's really enough there for a lifetime. And he's made a lifetime out of that. And I think you also have to just really value people. Like if you think about, I really value this interaction. I am going to remember this name. And if it's 6 months from today, the next time I meet this person, I will have their name in my head. I just think how that feels. When you do that a few times, then you almost don't need to reward yourself for it anymore because you know what it feels like. You'll be able to walk into a room and you will remember you'll never be alone.
Yeah, that's great. So do you have any advice for people? Because I know that for me, when I was first starting out, I was having conversations with people and I was literally just waiting for my turn to speak and not really listening. And I know that like networking, understanding and hearing the other person for what they're saying and trying to give that importance and have that curiosity to tap into it. Is there any techniques there or anything that you could provide our audience who may be suffering through something like that, like what I had to go through early on?
Right. So I would say, as for anything, over practice. So one of the lessons I learned both in classical guitar and classical piano is that, a classical musician might play a piece for 10 years before they play it in front of people, right? And you ever notice that the soloist has no music in front of them? The person who has the hardest job that day has no music in front of them. The entire orchestra might have music in front of them, but not the soloist. And so I wish I could say that there's a technique that really helps you to get out of your head and to listen to the other person rather than thinking about what you want to say. But the more that you talk to people, and again, put yourself in the high pressure situations, right? If you go on a podcast, or if you get up in front of people and you're a public speaker, or if you just record something for YouTube, trust me, talking to one person one-on-one is going to seem like nothing after that.
Oh man, such great advice. Wow. I wish I had met you so early on in my career. I know that I would have been so much further ahead. So it's such great practical advice. So I hope the listeners out there are really taking this in stride because this is very important stuff. These soft skills are just so incredibly important.
We have so many years to share experiences, Derek. No worries.
That's right. You're right. Absolutely. I love that. All right. Last question that I have before we start heading into the rapid round portion of the show is, okay, let's say that all of these investors or these people who are looking to build their networking skills have finally been able to do that, and they're networking and they're getting out there with people and talking. Would you say for you, maybe the end goal for all this networking? Like, is there a goal? Is there a destination that you get to and then it stops? Or is this like a thing that keeps happening over time? Like, what is this being done for?
Yeah, absolutely. So the immediate end goal for me was just to be able to raise capital so that we don't get a great deal and then have to turn it over to someone else. Yeah. But really, for me, everything is just about the challenge in life. If you love that challenge, it'll be worth the effort you put into it.
Yeah, I love that. Fantastic. Well, very well said. Awesome. So now that we have completed this part of the show, and hopefully that was great for you listeners, because I certainly learned a lot from this. We're going to head into the rapid round, and the rapid round is the same 5 questions that we ask every one of our podcast guests. So George, if you're ready for them, I'm going to go ahead and rapid fire them to you. Are you ready?
All right, hit me.
All right. Number 1, what book has had the biggest impact on you and why? And you cannot say The Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or the Bible, because everyone gives those answers.
Okay, both great books, but I've already mentioned How to Win Friends and Influence People, and it's amazing. So just read it and trust it. Try it a few times, and you'll see every chapter has just one single thing that you can do that you can put into practice right away. So it's simple. Just do it.
I think that's a great answer. We've mentioned Dale Carnegie many times. And to add on to that, Dale Carnegie, he wrote that book back in the 1800s, right? Or early 1900s.
I want to say, I think it was maybe towards the Depression. I think he was 20th century,
right.
But it's a perennial classic.
I was just going to say that like human beings are human beings. So regardless of whether you think that books get out of date, this one just doesn't. It's just a classic that will never change because people always want to feel special, important, and that book is just a classic. So thanks for mentioning that. Yeah. Number 2, if people wanted to emulate your success, what do you think is the first actionable thing that they could do to follow in your footsteps?
nobody does anything well that they aren't interested in. So you got to love it. Just love it. If you find you're doing something and you don't love it, rediscover that passion, or things are just not going to go well. When I went into bioscience, I asked what makes a great scientist, and I was surprised. I thought it's going to be like, you got to have a lot of math skill, or you got to be very technically talented. No, it's that you have to be curious, right? So to be a good scientist, you need to be curious, or you're not going to enjoy your experiments. But whatever you're doing, the answer is going to be very close to that. You have to love it.
Yep. Man, cannot add anything to that. Great response. Number 3, what is one tool, process, or hack in the last 3 months that has helped you save time and or effort?
I'm always using Excel, so I'll fall back on that. I've been expanding my market research, and there's always a better way to use Excel. It's not the most advanced technical tool, but the great thing about it is you can share it with anyone, and anyone can understand a spreadsheet on some level.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because I went to engineering school, right? And I think you also went to a similar type of technical school as well. But when I went to school, I was confident when I learned how Excel worked that you could pretty much run the world with Excel if you had the right inputs. You could run the entire world off of an Excel spreadsheet if you needed to.
So if
cool.
the world equals finance, then I'm pretty sure that the world actually does run off of the spreadsheet, because those people in finance just do some amazing things and some pretty frightening things with spreadsheets that I think that they probably need to start programming. But
yeah,
never mind.
absolutely. Actually, I've just started to get into, like, for asset managing a lot of our properties, I'm starting to understand how powerful scripts are, and you can write scripts inside of Excel or Google Sheets, and it's super cool. It's like a JavaScript, like kind of programming language embedded inside of the spreadsheet, which is like, it's blowing my mind right now. So it's super cool to have that. In any event, we'll move on. I know spreadsheets are a very big thing to us scientists and engineers, so I'll try to peel our love away from that and move on to the next question. Number 4, if the people you know had to describe you with one word, what word would that be and why?
Yeah, I would say determined, because determination is the one thing that got me through everything in my life. After completing a PhD and realizing that the people who complete the PhD are not necessarily the smartest people. I mean, I saw people fall by the wayside right and left, and it's the people who are determined. If you are determined, you will overcome any deficiency that you come into a process with.
Yeah, couldn't agree more there too. Awesome. Okay, last question I have for you is, and this is a tough question for podcast hosts, because podcast hosts are kind of out there already, but what small thing do most people not know about you?
Oh, well, let's see. I'm not sure if you knew it, because you kind of alluded to it, but I was in network science. And we have a sort of a Kevin Bacon game for network scientists. And we try to connect ourselves to the original network scientist, who was Paul Erdős. And you do it just like the Kevin Bacon game. So if you published a paper with researchers A, B, C, and D, then you see who they published with, and so on and so forth back. And I found out my Erdős number was number 5, which was pretty cool, because he's been gone a long time. And it's kind of difficult to connect yourself back through the years. But most people who have published in a quantitative field can connect themselves to Paul Erdős in some number of connections.
I love that. So cool. I learned something today. Very, very cool. Awesome. Well, so thank you so much, George, for coming on the show. I had a blast learning and basically just exchanging notes with you here on networking, because this is something that I'm definitely going to be listening to myself over again. And for those listeners who are out there, I highly recommend that you do the same as well. Every time you listen to something, you'll pick up something new. And George has got tons of gold here that he's brought onto the show. So George, thank you so much for coming on. But before you go, how about you tell the audience a little bit more about how they can find out about what's going on in your world and how they can get a hold of you?
So if you're interested in learning more about passive investing, come to www.horizonmultifamily.com. If you'd like to network with me and maybe meet me through Zoom, you can do that through LinkedIn. I'm there all the time. I would love it if you'd come out to find my YouTube channel, which is currently called Foundry Multifamily Podcast. And you can find me many other ways. I've got a Wednesday Zoom call. Reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'll let you on board with that. And if you're in Southeast Michigan, definitely contact me and come meet me in person. I've got an in-person meetup the first Monday of each month.
Awesome. Thank you so much, George, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. It was a genuine pleasure. I appreciated your questions, different than any of the podcasts I've ever been on.
Thank you. I like to hear that. We definitely want to make sure it's personalized to help maximize the return on listening time for the people who are listening. So for you listeners who have made it all the way to the end of the show, I want to applaud you. And I also want to thank you for listening to this content. And if you like it, please engage with us. Like, subscribe, just comment in general, wherever you're listening or watching this material, because we want to know more about you and appease the algorithm gods so that we can reach more people and provide more tremendous value, just like George has brought today to us. So that being said, George, thank you so much again for coming on the show. And this is Derek. We are signing off for the day. Thanks, everyone.